Good evening and welcome to AFL Insider. 4 teams left. It doesn't get any bigger than this. Well, it does, but that's next week. We've got a lot to look forward to. A couple of games to look back at from the weekend. 2 big preliminary finals to look ahead to. And the best minds in the game to pull it all apart. 2 of the resident gremlins, David King and Alistair Lynch. And alongside them, Brad Scott. Great to have you back, Scotty.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here. Exciting week of preliminary finals ahead. Tell
me, what did week 2 of the finals tell us?
Well, it tells us that history's a good judge. I mean, the top 4 usually get through and you know, it's very, very difficult. Brisbane did it in 2003 to lose a first final and then go through to win a preliminary final, but it rarely happens.
It was interesting. It was great to see Port Adelaide get in there, compete for a majority of the game.
They're only 2 kicks off a preliminary final.
Well, that's right. And you thought at half-time they can go on with this, but we saw the great team stand up, which we've recognised over the last 6 or 7 years.
I think you learn where you're short as a club, don't you? You watch those games now. This preliminary final round, for me, every other club, and Scotty, you're in the situation yourself, sits back and says, how far away are we from that level? And I think this is the week that we all look forward to more than any other week.
Well, I think Port Adelaide showed they're not too far away, and we're going to have a chat about them first and foremost. But before we get into it, let's cast our mind back to when Ken Hinkley sat down in front of the press for the very first time as coach of the Port Adelaide Football Club.
There is a reason for some people to come out on, you know, at the top at the right time, and you know, people have said the last man standing. I've heard those comments. Maybe I was the right man standing. We expect a side that's really honest in every contest, you know, and then we expect a lot of trust within the team. So I think that's what you should expect from the Port Adelaide Football Club, is an aggressive, honest, and a lot of trust and a lot of team-first attitude.
Well, they were interesting comments, weren't they? I love the way he handled the fact that maybe he wasn't the perceived first choice there, and then I think he's pretty much achieved what he set out to achieve in a very short space of time.
He's been extremely impressive. I think that he's got the team really well organised. They're playing a great brand of footy. Clearly his players are buying into what he's set out to achieve, and you know, all credit to him. It's been a fantastic season for Port.
Now, I just want to stick with you for a moment, Scotty, because they won the first 5 games of the season. They took it by storm, didn't they? They surprised everyone. You were the first team that beat them, I think, down in Tassie in round 6. How did you prepare for them? What had you seen over those first 5 weeks that you had to really put some time into?
Well, I think there was I said before that game that everyone was surprised, and I was certainly one. I don't think anyone expected Port to be 5-0 at the time, but I've got a lot of time for Ken Hinkley and have had for a long time. Alan Richardson really knows his stuff, and he's a very good assistant coach. They've had good draft picks. Ollie Wines has come in, Wingard, Boak, Hartlett. They're all top 5 picks just about. Yep. So when you combine that with Darren Burgess coming in, getting them really fit, they're well coached, they're well organised, they've got great talent, and they're really fit. So, I mean, sometimes it's simpler than you think.
Was there a big shift in terms of the game plan or the game style?
Oh, look, I think they were playing players in really effective roles, and they appeared to be really well organised and really clear on what they had to do. So, I mean, we had to plan around certainly Boak, Hartlett and Wingard, because they were all in terrific form. And the guys did a reasonable job on them, but Wingard got away from us and justified his All-Australian selection last night.
Philosophically, as a young coach or a new coach going into a club, it looked like they had a plan over the summer to engage the media, to get out to the fans and give the inner sanctum a bit of a first-hand look to their fans. I mean, I think you spent time in the box. I was involved in pre-game meetings. How tough a decision is that for a young coach to make in the off-season before you actually coach your first game?
Well, I think you've got to balance everything. I mean, I started on Insider in my first year as a senior coach, and that was a decision between Fox and the footy club to really promote North Melbourne and to get North Melbourne, you know, relevant again. And I think Port probably made a similar decision in having Kingy in the box and involving you at different stages, Lynchy. So there's always a balance, but you know, nothing you do can ever affect your team. But the bottom line is we want to engage our fans, and personally when I talk, I'm talking to our supporters, sponsors and members, and I'm sure Ken's the same.
They've improved 4 goals this year, Scotty. They've kicked 16 more points than last year, and they've saved 7 points on average last year. That's a huge first year, isn't it? How hard now to replicate what they've done this year next year?
Well, I think that's the big challenge, but I think they'll improve again. I think one of the things they did really well was they were a very fit side. They finished off games really well. That game you mentioned at Hobart, I think we ended up sort of almost 40 points up at one stage and ended up winning by 10. Yeah, we dominated early, but they certainly ran over the top of us at the end. But I think that, for me, the things that stand out with Port this year is they've been able to stop the opposition getting the ball in their attacking half. They've been very well organised in defence, and their tackling's just gone to another level. They're one of the best tackling sides in the comp.
I want to show one clip here, boys, of their year for me. And their motto all year has been never give in. We can't guarantee we're going to win. We can't guarantee how we're going to go week to week, quarter to quarter. But what they can do is they can guarantee that they'll give 100% effort for 100% of the time. That was message from day one, externally from Koshy down to the coach, down to the captain, and right through the playing list. This passage of play is ugly, but it goes for about 30 seconds, and it just shows you that it's not necessarily skill that gets them a result in the end. It's not necessarily class, not necessarily leadership, really. It's just 22 players buying in week to week that this passage of play. It ends up being a goal, Lynchy, but look, it is ugly, isn't it? It's great.
It is, and you might have noticed Justin Westhoff was slammed on the centre wing in a tackle, and because of work rate and Tommy Logan goes to ground, knocks it forward, saying when Monfrey's now grey to the man that was slammed into the ground on centre wing, he'd push forward. Hamish Hartlett is there as well, who could have got a possession. He was in the goal square at the other end of the ground at the time that play started. So it was fantastic, and I, like you, watching that, you think, that's been typical of Port Adelaide. Never say die, get the ball forward at all costs, scrap it forward, and they will get the end result.
When you see that, Jason, Scotty, you think, gee, that team's changed enormously. I want to show you a team from 12 months earlier, from when they had their that loss against GWS in round 19 of 2012. So really only effectively, half a dozen games prior to what we've seen this year. They're the changes. Pearce obviously was moved on, Chaplin was moved on, and those guys have since parted company with where they are right now. But the bulk of the team's still there. The bulk of that lineup is still there, and it is about the structural benefits. The coaching's clearly a different message, and a bit of hope and a bit of belief back into the place. It's amazing what can change quickly.
I certainly wouldn't disregard the impact Matthew Primus had at that footy club. I mean, I think that quite often, and Ken Hickley's done a fantastic job, and he's a very good coach. But I think quite often we neglect to look back at the previous coach who'd set a lot of things in place, and we can see from that side that a lot of the players were already there, a lot of the development was already put into those players, and they've had them all available. I mean, every single one of those players were all available to play last week against Collingwood and had a really good season, as evidenced by Boak, an All-Australian, and Wingard, an All-Australian.
That club's unrecognisable now, though. The Primus days are long gone.
But that's the last team he coached, and I take what Scotty's saying on board. He was on the right track. Yeah. He was putting together the right side, and some of those young stars have now had another season under the belt. They're a little bit more experienced, and they've really started to shine through.
But that's where Kenny's, I think, polished up probably Matty Primus's hard work. But he's gone in, and two of the older guys like Cassisi and Corns, he's engaged them in the whole process. He's told them straight away, first training session, I want you as part of the team. You're a really important part of the team. I think that helps. If you engage the power brokers in the team, you're well on the way.
I'm not here to end, I'm here to extend, that's were the words that he used.
And I think he'd also...
Until it's time to end.
Yes.
Well, that's going to be a time.
But the end comes to us all. I mean, the thing is, I think Ken would be the first to acknowledge the impact of Darren Burgess, of Alan Richardson. I mean, at North Melbourne, we're really fortunate to have Steve Saunders. We've got great player availability and a great injury rate. Yeah. So it is a team effort. It's not just the coach.
And let's not forget Koshy as well. Yeah. He put the club on
the brand well, hasn't he?
On the national market straight away. As soon as he walked in, I think he was mocked by some media commentators that it was a joke, living out of Sydney, being the president of the club. A fantastic appointment. And he's actually got them really up and going, and had I think their first sponsor was announced at the MCG, one of the car dealers, so fantastic.
I want to talk about impact in the game, Scotty, and I think you're best placed to fill us in here. It was a great win by Sydney under pretty adverse circumstances. You lose Tippett, and then you lose Mitchell in the first term. So you've already used your sub, and then you've got a rotation down. What is the flow-on effect throughout the course of the game or the next three quarters?
Well, I think the first decision they had to make was obviously how bad is Tippett, because, I mean, if it's really bad, well, it's an instant decision, you activate your sub. But Sydney generally activate their sub as late as possible, and that's probably, I suspect, because they're worried about getting another injury and the impact of that. So when Tippett was subbed, I mean, the worst possible scenario happened when Mitchell got injured almost immediately. So then it becomes, we're down on rotations. We've got to leave our big guys out there. So they went in pretty tall with Pike and Mumford and Jesse White. And then, fortunately for them, I think, they've got a really flexible midfield. So Jude Bolton goes into the midfield. McVeigh started in there. But all of those guys spend a lot more time in the midfield, and they're able to share the load.
So we saw the big drop-off in rotation. So what you're saying is the key posts, they stay on the ground, got to play basically 100 minutes, and the midfielders try to do the same rotations?
Well, I think another area of Sydney did it really well. They controlled the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if Carlton had been able to win the ball and control the ball and force Sydney to defend, you would have seen the impact of that lack of rotation and that man down. But Sydney were able to control the ball. They kept it in their forward half for almost about half an hour at one stage. Carlton just couldn't get it forward. So as a coach, you've got to manage your list as best you can that you've got, but controlling the footy is the most important thing.
Speaking of Carlton, you've spoken about Mick's mantra. How do you think that panned out over the weekend?
Well, they need to look at it. There's no doubt about that. Mick's been pretty inflexible with the way they've played the last few years, but I think most teams know where they're going now, where the ball's going. It's predictable to Carlton, but it's predictable to the opposition as well. And you can just see here the long down-the-line kick, which is pretty much every exit from Carlton's back 50. Goes wide, goes to that exact spot there. And Sydney were onto it. And they just kept winning that ball back. When they were under pressure too, Scotty, exactly as you said, down a couple of men. And these sorts of plays just kept them in the game and it really saved them. When you look at the results, Lynchy, over the last 7 weeks, Carlton have trailed by an average of 3 goals at half-time of every one of those games. Now, that to me says they haven't really got going until Mick's actually said go and play, take some risks, go through the corridor, tip the whole game on its head in the second half to come back and win the bulk of those games. But against quality sides like Sydney in a final was never going to happen. And I think they really need to assess what the balance is going forward, and I'm sure the off-season will do that for them.
Well, it was very similar to the week before against Richmond. They were struggling against the Tigers, bombing the ball long, but certainly then once they changed up and used the ball short, it was much more advantageous for them.
There's the intercept marks there you can see in that third quarter. Grundy having 8 intercept marks, and obviously Teddy Richards was the other one who was fantastic. He had 7 as well. So they just knew where it was going. They took a few risks, and that's good quality defence as well.
That's the strength of Sydney, though. I think Grundy and Richards have been doing that for a long time. In fact, Hawthorn probably lost a grand final last year on the back of Sydney's fantastic defence. I think the inside 50s in that grand final last year was 63 to 42 in Hawthorn's favour. So Sydney are very good at defending that situation. But one thing I know about Mick Moldhouse, he's a coaching veteran of almost 30 years. So he has evolved over the journey, and I'm sure he will again. You
mentioned Hawthorn. The week before we saw the Sydney Swans come up against Hawthorn, and the centre clearances were an issue. We have a look at some stoppage vision from the weekend. So they took on Carlton. They wanted to make a statement from the start. We'll see here, this is the first bounce of the day, and unusually we see here McVeigh in the middle along with Kennedy and obviously Jack. So they've gone in with the big guns to start with. Now, McVeigh averages only 5 clearances. 5 stoppages in the middle of the ground per game, so he's very low. Actually, when he goes in there, he's about the best in the competition as far as that group will get the ball 49% of the game. I mean, when he's not in there, the Sydney Swans go at 44%. So he's a real impact player. It looks like they've tried to make a statement from the start.
Well, the question would be, why wouldn't he be in there all the time?
If he's got that sort of record.
Yeah, and I think this is the dilemmas you face all the time. Sydney last year, mainstays of their defence were Marty Matner, Reece Shaw, Alex Johnson. Well, none of them are there at the moment. So McVeigh's gone back and had an All-Australian year as a halfback flanker. So it's a fair luxury to have. That guy's an All-Australian halfback flanker and thoroughly deserved to put him in the midfield and have 20 possessions in a quarter.
So how does that happen? How do you let a player get off the chain for 20 touches in a quarter of footy?
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion because we obviously covered the game extensively. When you looked at half-time, the margin was only 20 points.
Yep.
So a lot of the numbers are irrelevant, really.
Yep.
Was he out of control? Was he the one connecting those scores together? Was he the one getting those chains going? Look, he had a part to play, but I'm not sure all of those disposals were as damaging as what we all think. 20 is a huge number. I've got no doubt about that, but they were only 3 goals down.
But he's had 20 possessions, 85% efficiency by foot, 15 uncontested, and he's kicked a goal as well. So, and he's had 3 clearances. So he was using the ball well. He was in space. At some stage, you've probably got to jump on him.
What's going through the mind of whoever's responsible for him?
Oh, look, there's no doubt Mick would have had a few nudges that McVeigh was starting to rack up the possessions, but they had Curnow going to Hanbury, which wasn't really working for them as well as Mick would have liked either. So the question becomes then, what do we do with Curnow? Do we switch him from Hanbury over to McVeigh? Then do we lose both of them? Do Hanbury and McVeigh really start to take off and Curnow is not having an impact on either? So you've always got to look at, OK, everyone could see that McVeigh was getting the footy. No doubt Mick would have seen that too. What he has to assess is what's the flow-on effect from that if we send someone to McVeigh, what's the domino effect? Do we lose someone else from half-back? Do we put Simpson in there, but then we lose our run from half-back? All those sorts of things go through your mind. So it's not as simple. It's easy to identify what's wrong. It's much harder to identify what to do about it.
The one thing he did do was work hard. We know that Sydney work as hard as anyone. I think we talk about two-way running in the midfield. Yeah. If Kieran Jack isn't the epitome of that, I don't know who is. And we've got a great clip to show here where he actually starts deep in defence. And you can see him. So he's on Chris Judd. And he's worked back deep and he's coming out of the defensive 50. All of a sudden, there's a contested ball up on the wing. He's still drifting past. He's got goal side of Judd. So there's a small gap there. And then he sees the open space and he sees what might unfold. There is a vacant 50 for him to run into. He just puts the head down and goes. Chris Judd trying to go with him, but he runs him off his legs. That is brilliant stuff, one end to the other, and just reward. Because a lot of the times you hear about unrewarded running. I like seeing players get rewarded when they actually do, almost bust a valve or a gasket when they take something like that on.
Well, we're going to talk about the All-Australian team a little bit later, but a little bit of conjecture around Kieran Jack as a half-forward flanker. Yeah. But I've got no issue with him being in the 22. No, I mean, play him wherever you like. He's got that great mix of inside-outside game, got terrific speed, can win the ball in a contest, but as that vision shows, can get forward and score as well.
And it wasn't optimistically running forward. He paused at a stoppage on the wing. He paused for a minute, saw they maintain possession, then went again. So it was just burst running.
Let's have a look at Port's game again on the weekend. We've only got the 2 games to go through, Scotty, so we're giving them a smashing, lads. But I want to look at the contrast between the first half and the second half in a moment. But Port and Geelong both had a spare man behind the ball in the first half, and it was actually quite a frustrating game to watch because every time Port got the ball, they'd do that sort of play and get it going their way and back their work rate and their work ethic to get forward and score. And they passed up so many opportunities by foot. They missed so many targets. They would have been really disappointed as a group because they were working hard and they didn't get the rewards on the scoreboard, Lynch. In a couple of those things go their way, show a bit more poise that they'd shown for probably the best part of 2 months of football, really, if not the whole year. They may have been in front in that game by a significant margin, a little bit more composure. The Cats love that sort of game.
Well, I think Geelong the same. I mean, Geelong weren't really efficient with their ball use going forward. I can't remember a game where Geelong have only had 9 scoring shots in the first half. They kicked 3 goals, 6. I mean, that's just unbelievable. So Geelong were a little bit the same in the way they used the ball going forward. But I thought, obviously, Geelong cleaned it up in the second half, but the pressure of finals can't be underestimated. I mean, those targets that we saw there, you might think they're easy targets to hit, but the pressure goes through the roof in finals.
Absolutely. Now, Port did change it up at different stages. Have a look at some vision from the weekend again in the game, and we'll see how they've now refused to bomb the ball long to where they're outnumbered. So with patience, they've kicked around the umbrella sort of shape to come around to the far wing, get players out into space, use the ball shorter if needed. See Tommy Logan here looking upfield, use the handball with the overlap run, and now they've got the opportunity to go short. Now that was a bad kick, but the philosophy was certainly right, and they end up getting a goal out of it, probably luckily in the end with Travis Boak taking a great mark there at the top of the goal square. But again, we see this piece of vision again. Outnumbered, long, left of screen, so they go back around, loop it around again, got numbers on the far side because Geelong have pushed over to really outnumber Port Adelaide on this near side. Now on the spread, again, good ball use to find the spare target if needed, and to go wide again, they've got it down to Monfries, who finds the ball here, and young Tommy Logan has worked his way from the back half, puts in a short lead and generates a shot at goal. So that was the change.
Yeah, they're great athletes, aren't they? Great gut runners, good endurance pace. The Cats, as you said, had a horror in that first half as well. And if they play like this on Friday night, I've got no doubt the Hawks will blow them away with their ball use. They were very predictable. They got the ball in long and deep, which is what, more often than not, we promote our players to do, Jace. But they were able to be picked off again by Port, who were terrific the week before against Collingwood. We said they took 27 intercept marks that night. They took 10 in the first half and looked well on the way to getting the game played on their terms again. Numbers back, and then just through sheer work rate, see if they get the ball going the other way. Their pressure was good around the action, around the heat to force some high balls in. Their support play is really good. Gives them a great foundation, I've got no doubt, going forward. But, gee, they could have tidied some of this up. I've got no doubt at half-time they really blew an opportunity to have a good lead and maybe find themselves in a prelim.
Yeah, I think both sides, again, probably were disappointed with the way they used the ball going forward. But it's really surprising if you look at the statistics across the year that Port rank in the bottom 4 for kicking kicking and disposal efficiency, which is incredible. Sydney are quite low as well. So, there's a lot more to it than just using the ball going well, because clearly they've done a lot right defensively and their tackling's been elite as well.
After half-time, the Cats changed the whole thing, and they were able to flip it around, use some composure, use some angles, and get the game played on their terms. And it was their leaders again that always seemed to find a way to just settle things down and really just control the situation there. He gives that to Selwood, gives that to Christensen. He changed the game through angles. Doesn't bomb it in like they had in the first half. Then they're able to get good one-on-ones, put the Port defenders in an isolated position. Same thing again here. Varco's short kick, and then goes and gets inside that forward 50 in a shallow sense, but just provides a really good target. Bomb that long, you're going to get Port with their numbers back and their ability, as we said before, to assist and come across and provide some sort of spoiling or intercept marking presence was great in the first half, but second half the Cats just flipped their game on their head.
Yeah, it was definitely a change, but it helps when you've got a couple of superstars wandering around the middle of the ground as well. But they use that ball really well.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of the conundrums you face at half-time. Look, we're not doing something well. Again, easy to identify. We can all see what they need to change, but it's how do you change it and how do you instill in your players that you've got to make that change? Because the worry is that you tell your players, look, we've got to start looking shorter. Then they go short all the time, irrespective of what's on.
Yeah.
So
it's funny how players can overcorrect when they get a message.
Oh, they want to do the right thing,
Yep.
and very, very rarely, if ever, do players go against coaches' instructions. But you want players who can think for themselves out there, and Geelong have got plenty of those.
All right, we need to take a break on AFL Insider. A lot to look forward to. Preliminary finals weekend, match committee. And we're also going to have a chat to Alistair Lynch, who is single-handedly restructuring the Brisbane Lions. We'll take a look at what the Lions might look like on field in 2015.
I see this life like a swinging vine, swing my heart across the line. In my face is flashing signs, seek it out and ye shall find. Old, but I'm not that old.
Preliminary final weekend, and Buddy Franklin is a big inclusion for the Hawks. But as Alistair Lynch tells us, it's the sort of challenge that the Cats' Tom Lonergan seems to thrive upon.
This weekend, the hopes of Hawthorn fans all over the country will rest largely on the shoulders of their star full forward Buddy Franklin and his match-up with nemesis Tom Lonergan. Since 2008, they've played on each other 7 times, and Buddy's return, just 13 goals. That's less than 2 goals a game. When we stand them together, you can see that they're both similar height, but surprisingly Lonergan is only 93 kilos, 10 lighter than Buddy. We know Buddy's strength is his athleticism, and when the ball hits the deck, it's almost impossible to stop him. But Lonergan's got him covered in the air and has the discipline to stick with him for the 120 minutes. If we look at the last 3 encounters, Tom Lonergan has held Buddy to 1, 2 and 0 goals. Not many of his opponents could claim that record against the superstar. In round 15, Geelong won by 10 points. Buddy's return that day, 3 marks and 1 goal. And that goal was thanks to some creative work at ground level, hard for anyone to stop. At the start of the year, again, it was Geelong who won. This time was 7 points. Franklin fared a little better, kicking 2 from 5 marks and 14 disposals. Then we go back to round 2 from 2012. Buddy kicked 2 goals, 4 behinds that day, but none on Tom Lonergan. Again, he took just 3 marks, one of those contested. And Jace, as you can appreciate, it's not just the Franklin-Lonergan matchup that will occupy the coach's thoughts.
No, you're right, Lynchy. So many matchups to look forward to. Another one is the reigning Coleman medalist, Jared Roughead, taking on Harry Taylor. Now, Roughead's kicked 70 goals this year, but he's played on Harry Taylor 10 times for a total of 13 goals.
Yeah, look, the form they're both in. You've got the All-Australian centre-half back in Harry Taylor, and you've got the All-Australian forward and Coleman medalist in Roughead. Roughead's in terrific form offensively, 70 goals for the year, and Taylor's certainly going to have his work cut out for him, but he's so pivotal to the Geelong defence. I think he's, the premier defender in the competition. So, whether it's Roughead, Lonergan's usually the matchup for Franklin, but, we may find with a bit of reshuffling with Enright not there that perhaps, there's a different matchup for Taylor this week.
Well, let's just talk about that structure for a moment. If you're coaching, and I'd never get you to second guess another coach, but pretend you're coaching, you've got Franklin and Roughead as your forwards and you're facing Lonergan and Taylor. How do you want them to structure up, and what sort of game style do you want them to play?
Oh, look, I think Roughhead's played as predominantly the deeper forward this year, and Alistair Clarkson made it really clear at the start of the year that he wanted to change up the forward line, make it a little bit more unpredictable, play different players in different positions, and the addition of David Hale and Gunston down there with Rioli and Brewster as forwards, I mean, there really isn't a weak link down there. But I think Franklin, with his aerobic ability and his run, his ability to get up the ground and help out the midfield and get a bit of run going back towards goal is the way to go, particularly when you've got Hale and Roughhead and Gunston playing deeper.
Yeah, so much to look forward to. You mentioned Cyril Rioli as one of those players, and Kingy, that's going to be interesting, particularly if Corey Enright doesn't play.
Oh, absolutely, Jace. He's played 13 games this year and he's kicked 18 goals. And on the back of the numbers you just told us about the key position players, Lynchy, there's a bit of trouble. They might not get enough goals, the Hawks. Who would have thought?
Yeah, well, that's right. It's it's a big role that Cyril has to play, and certainly we see his heat map from the rounds 1 to 18. You see, he's happy to get up the ground. I mean, the yellow, obviously, where he spends a bit of time up the middle of the ground, out on the right-hand side, obviously for his left foot as he flicks back towards goal. And we just see over the last month of footy that he's actually been playing, rounds 19 to 22. He's happy to stay closer to goal, and you've got a theory on that one, Kingy.
I think the Hawks may have just said, listen, we need to get you through a finals campaign. We don't want you running midfield minutes and tiring your hamstrings and fatiguing yourself into an injury. And I've got a little smirk coming back at me, so I'm a bit reluctant to go with it.
No, that's right.
But,
Look, it's a difficult one because, and Scotty, you've probably had this decision to make with certain players. Do you chuck him in the midfield and let him get his 25 or 30? Or if he can have 12 or 15 in the forward 50, is that going to have a bigger impact than what he's doing in the middle of the ground?
Well, I've got no doubt we would have avenged our 117-point loss last year down at Launceston in round 5 this year had it not been for Rioli playing in the midfield. He pushed up the ground, he got a lot of possession. He went forward and kicked 4 goals as well. So that day he did both. He got up the ground, he got added some spread and run from the Hawthorn midfield, but got forward and scored. So in an ideal world, he does both. But depending on how he is physically, closer to goal is always dangerous.
how tough to match up on him this week, given that Corey Enright's not there?
I think it's really difficult, but I think I was really impressed with Cam Guthrie against Fremantle. I thought he was outstanding, particularly in the first quarter when the game was really tight. Taylor Hunt can play those roles as well, but Corey Enright's just been a marvel. I think when they pick the All-Australian side these days, they just put Corey Enright in to start with, and they work it around that.
Absolutely, I think so. How is Cyril's conditioning? What can we expect? I mean, he's had 3 weeks out of football, and so what training would he have done over the last week or so?
Yeah, he's missed 2 games, so he's had 3 weeks out, but they put plenty of run into the legs, plenty of conditioning, and the last week or so, full on every sort of training. Contact, all that sort of stuff. So didn't take any risks early, wanted to get him right, and then you let him loose and just keep the fingers crossed.
And you wouldn't tell us anything
absolutely not.
No, that's right. So waste of time.
The expectations of Cyril, seriously, because I think we look at him and we expect that he's going to get 20, 25 positions just because he's a great player. It's really the defensive pressure, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
The harassment.
That to me is probably more important than what he does possession-wise, because what he can do is make a back six very jumpy. So it makes defenders get rid of the ball quicker. They've got to make quicker decisions, and that creates a hell of a lot of turnovers. Even if he's not grabbing them, the thought that he might be chasing them or getting close to them can be just as powerful an influence as actually making the tackles or smothers or getting possessions himself.
Yeah, I think it's almost, when you're a really good side like both these two teams are, Hawthorn and Geelong are outstanding teams. Yeah. I think it's almost, in a way, disrespectful to Hawthorn to suggest that they're relying on Rioli. I mean, what a great job they did against the Swans without Franklin or Rioli. So I think they're a better team than that. I think Rioli will just come in and do his job, and if he kicks a few goals, that's great, but his mere presence is enough.
Boys, let's have a look at the Vero performance indicators for this week, because this is where the Cats actually have a stranglehold on the Hawks.
Should I look away?
Well, I think you should. I think you should, because it's pretty simple to see when you look at the numbers here. That's the competition when Hawthorn's forward 50 for their entries. If they go that inside 70 and then get the ball in, rather than the bombed entries, which is outside 70. Those long balls we see quite often. That's the goal percentages. So 28% of the time when they get inside that 70-metre area before they go in, obviously that's higher than the bombed entries. And that's the percentage they're likely to mark the ball. That's against the competition this year. Let's have a look at what they do against the Cats in particular. And that's the system of Enright, Mackie, Taylor, Lonergan, all supporting each other. There's the 2 games this year. Look at how drastically those numbers drop away. in terms of their returns for goals. And I know that was a wet night, that one there, but that's just the way it is. And there's the marking percentages of those entries as well. This is where Geelong base their game. I've got no doubt when they look at the Hawthorn matchup, they say, let's get this in order down back. Let's get support on the stars, their talent forward of centre to put the score on the board, and then we get our game going through the corridor after that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It's always really interesting looking at statistics and the way you want to play. It's all reliant on two things. It's contested possession when the ball's in dispute, and it's your pressure on the opposition when they've got the ball.
Yep.
And if you can do that, then that makes it really hard for the opposition to play the way they want to play. So even if Hawthorn start to make some adjustments, if they can't pressure around the footy and win enough of the footy, it's going to be very hard for them to change that anyway.
When you have a look at the other two contenders in the top four at the moment, there's the averages against Fremantle and Sydney coming up now. So it does give you an idea that it is just Geelong. It is the best versus the best there. So it is just Geelong that have this hold on them in a defensive sense. I was surprised by those numbers, I've got to say. I didn't think there'd be such a disparity between a Fremantle and a Geelong. But it is stark, isn't it?
It is. It's a massive jump. It's hard to read and understand exactly why that happens so much. I mean, what are you reading? I mean, because all players, I mean, certainly Sydney and Freo at times play the loose man in defence as well.
I'll tell you one thing that I read into it, and this is what I think escapes a lot of people. You look at those numbers and you say, wow, that is a marked difference. I think at times the perception of the competition is that Hawthorn should be doing better and they keep failing against Geelong. I think we're underestimating how good a side Geelong is and how good a side they've been for the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
There's 3 premierships amongst them and always thereabouts come the end of September. They're the best side going around. And so you're up against the best and you've got to find a way to get through.
So do you have to change something drastically because you've lost the last 11 when there's only been such... I mean, there's been a kick in it most times.
Yeah. Well, see, and for that fact, I don't think it's ever a drastic change. But you've got to tweak. You're forever tweaking, aren't you, Scotty? Just little subtle variations, better ball use, better options, just to make sure you can break it up a bit.
Well, Scotty, I'll get you to give us some of these tweaks as we run through some vision, just to show how that comes about, how that actually plays out. You can just see there's a ball going down the wing. The Hawks have turned that over. Pretty ordinary turnover, really, when you look at it.
Come on,
but the Cats back into their game. Handball through the midfield. Now, there's a missed target. Now, if we pause that there, you can see more often than not that sort of turnover in that part of the ground, Scotty. That's a goal. I don't care who you've got behind that ball there. But as we play this out, you can see as this ball's kicked high into the forward line, watch the Cat defenders get back quickly, get back first, come off their man. Now, there's 4v2 pretty much instantly there, and I think that's the mechanics of how they play. Protect the corridor in that defensive 50, then we go. We play quality footy with the ball.
The big issue there, though, was once Hawthorn got that turnover at half-back, they bombed it. They had 2 short targets in the corridor, the little chip over the top, and they're fine. But if you just kick it long, that's exactly what Geelong want, and then they sweep it out, as you say.
We'll keep going through a couple more. I'll get you to comment on these, Scotty, if you can. We've got the stoppage situation. I think the Cats are really well organised at being able to get that player to hold off the back. Now, at the top of the screen here, you can just see that's Mackie and Hale in there. We'll allow this vision to roll on, and you can see what eventuates. A little bit of a scrimmage off a stoppage. David Hale comes up to put pressure on the back of that stoppage. Not sure he's going to give you a lot there, Jace, in all honesty. But it allows Mackie out the back. Now, that quick kick out, we won't bother watching too much of this particular bit of vision, but you can just see there, straight away you get a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-1 eventuating. That's the system that's hard to break down.
But again, it gets down to that pressure on the ball. I mean, this is a preliminary final. I mean, both sides would like to use the ball better from that contested situation and be able to chain the ball out from there. But you're under enormous pressure, and the tackling pressure is going to be fierce on Friday night, I've got no doubt. But look, to me, the numbers are telling. But I think what it also says is anyone who's questioning Mackie, Enright and Harry Taylor as all Australians this year, the numbers speak for themselves.
Well, let's have a look at how aggressive Mackie is as well. And we saw Enright just then at the back of that stoppage. This is the mindset. Here's Mackie out here on the right-hand side. You can see him making his way up the ground there, hands in the air. He's pushing right up to the top of 50 into his forward half to become a scoring option, to actually become a goal kicker. Now, they use him. They love to use their defenders on that spin around there and give them an opportunity. If we just pause that there, we'll just highlight where Gibson is. That's Gibson there in a very similar sort of situation. Now, Mackie would be over here. Mackie would be over that side of the ground looking to get himself in the same position we just showed, but Gibson's more defensively minded.
Correct.
And he holds back, looking to get back first to cover. It's just a different approach, a different school of thought. There's no right or wrong. It just shows you why the Cat defenders are so productive in a scoreboard sense.
Yeah, I think all teams do it a little bit differently. I think we'll see in Saturday's game both Sydney and Fremantle getting numbers back, and the system's slightly different, but the most important thing is that you stick to your own system and you don't try and get dictated to by the opposition.
Once they get that, we're breaking the Cats down a fair bit, but it is a great display of football they put on. Once they get that and force the turnover, Lynchy, which has just happened here, it's just eventuated at the defensive end for the Cats. Now, as you can see, these players coming through the middle of the ground, let's highlight a couple of pairs here. Manned up, and manned up here. Now I've just drawn everywhere there, Lynchy. But the players that are manned up, they work their way out of the centre square. They try and get out to this wing line here or the opposing wing line over there to take their opponent and themselves out of the play. Those that are free get into the absolute corridor of the ground. If they are manned up, they work their way out of there again to allow their teammates who are free, and you can see that handball chain starting at the back there, to get involved and come at speed through the corridor. Overlap, force the Hawk to come up and pick them up, overlap again, and then they get close to that 50-metre arc. That's a clever kick at the end. That's a great kick at the end. But both teams, in my opinion, have that sort of skill, so that's not an asset either way. But their mechanics have been able to come through the corridor. Fremantle stopped, and Port Adelaide actually stopped that defensive 50. They put numbers back. I'll be fascinated to see what the Hawks do this week, because you can't allow that corridor separation like they're able to get week in, week out.
Yeah, and again, it's easier said than done. I mean, I think that most sides, or I'd suggest every side, know what Geelong love to do. Stopping them is another matter. Yeah. It's a great Lee Matthews term. He used to say, I'll hand our game plan to the opposition coach and just challenge him to beat it.
But you do need a method, though. You do need. If that hasn't worked for 11 times in a row, you can't expect to front up and just have a result fall your way.
I think there's a lot of elements that go into the losses. I take Jason's point. It's the best two teams in the competition right now. Fremantle are close, but over the last couple of years, the two best teams, and it's been a kick in it each time. So I think both teams have been playing their method against the other team. It'll evolve. There'll be some slight tweaks. I think there'll be more
fallout than that. If Geelong beat Hawthorn this week, I think there'll be more fallout than what's happened in the previous couple of losses.
You think Jeff Kennett will get a call? Or?
No, I'm being serious. I mean,
well, when you say fallout, what do you mean?
Well, it gets to a point. It must get to a breaking point at Hawthorn where you say, how come we can't beat this mob? Is it how we're playing? Is it who we're playing? Are we doing the right things here? You'd have to start questioning the whole structure of what happens when you play Geelong, surely.
Well, you're talking about breaking point. It's exactly the same thing, though, about you try to put yourself in a position to compete in September every year. Yeah. And if you're doing that, and you're doing it at the pointy end, you're giving yourself a chance. That's all you can do as a football club. Now, if you keep coming up against one team that's a little better, maybe the cold, hard reality is you mightn't be good enough. You need to tweak the personnel perhaps a little bit. Maybe some subtle tweaks of the game plan. But you can't throw out the door what's worked against 16 other clubs just for the sake of one club.
No, not throwing out, but it comes to a point where you can't keep tweaking for 5, 6, 7 years in a row.
You have to, because that's all you can do.
I think we haven't beaten Sydney in 4 years. I mean, they beat us by a point. I mean, the thing is, there's personnel in that too. So I think if you looked at the Hawthorn-Geelong sides, largely the core's still there, but there has been some changes in personnel. Hawthorn beat everyone else, so it's very difficult just to plan for one side. And I think, they're going to make some tweaks to their game plan, no doubt, because they'll have looked at previous games, but they can't completely change their personnel. And I think they might look at things and say, maybe we need some different players to try and beat Geelong. They've brought in Brian Lake. What a critical inclusion, and there's an argument to say Brian Lake was brought to Hawthorn for this game.
But the reality is, late in the game, if it's tight, Geelong players will have a lot of confidence that they've done it before, got over the top. And Hawthorn, not that they'll lose confidence, but they were just in the back of their mind, they'll have just a small ounce of a thought that, all right, here we go again.
Well, you're right, but I think also the flip side of that argument is that at some stage the Hawthorn players have got to get a ruthlessness and a hatred in their minds that says, not this time. I don't care what it takes, but not this time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of ruthless players, just flipping back to the other game again, Sydney versus the Fremantle Dockers, Crowley. Who's he going to match up on? And we look at the last time they met, and we look at it was at the SCG, and we see some highlights here. Now, Crowley had the Hanbury matchup, and Hanbury managed to drag him forward, and on this occasion kicked a goal. We'll see where this starts, and we'll see left of the screen here, we've got the little discs on the players here. Hanbury starts on half-back. Now, this is the thing with Crowley. You have to move him because he's a strong player. He puts a lot of body pressure on. Now, Hanbury's got north of him here, and it's a foot race, and you think Hanbury's going to win this. on every occasion. Pushes forward, they maintain possession going through the middle of the ground, isolates him one-on-one at the top of the goal square, and probably just not the awareness to play full back. Crowley lost body contact and Hanbury kicked a goal. This one here, now, I mean, you can't do a lot here about this, but this is how it panned out. He played on him for 45 minutes. He conceded 12 disposals when Hanbury was on him, or Crowley was on Hanbury. Again, from the stoppage with his pace, got half an opportunity on the left foot, drilled one home. Now, this one here it is now, together at the stoppage, stationary at the moment, takes off, Fremantle fumble, and comes out, maintain possession of the Sydney Swans, and again, he just powers forward. Now, he ran back on his teammates to gain possession, and he had the skill to hurt him on the way back. Now, this one, Crowley can't accept any responsibility for this one. Basically, Daniel Hanbury's come off the interchange bench and wandered out to the half-forward flank by himself. Hanbury had a great game, 27 disposals, was a very, very good player on the night, but does Crowley go to Hanbury, or is it a McVeigh? Well, McVeigh almost leads every... he leads disposals, he leads uncontested ball, his kicking efficiency, everything at the Sydney Swans. Does he go to McVeigh?
Well, I think it's a real challenge. And look, this was the strength for Sydney on the weekend against Carlton, their flexibility in the midfield. We mentioned Jude Bolton earlier in the show. I mean, Jude has played predominantly half forward this year, and he went into the midfield. There's Kennedy, Des McGlynn, come back into the equation. I mean, there are so many options for Sydney that's the challenge. And if Crowley does go to McVeigh, well, McVeigh's an All-Australian half-back, so does he just go back and play there? And then Crowley's either got to play half-forward or pick another opponent. So I think that the depth and the versatility of Sydney's midfield give them a bit of an advantage there. But Freo in unbelievable form after a week off, going to be hard to beat.
A quick break, we'll come back and look at the All-Australian side, and then Alistair Lynch, how he's pillaging the rest of the competition to rebuild the Brisbane Lions.
Time now to meet the 2013 4-20 AFL All-Australian side.
The All-Australian team for 2013 was announced last night, and a number of players got their first cap in the All-Australian side, and it was great to see, great honour from many players. And probably the talking point always on All-Australian night is the players that miss out, which is not quite right, because all the players that make the side they richly deserve their spot. As we have a look through the side here, and Scotty Thompson down back, full back for the first time, absolutely deserves that spot. He was fantastic all year.
Yeah, he was a mainstay of our defence and just a critical player for us. And I agree with you. Celebrate the 22 players that made it. I mean, I'm biased. I mean, I'm really disappointed Lindsay Thomas didn't make it, but I wouldn't question any of those guys in that forward line or on the bench.
I think it provides us with a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, because we like to say who should be there. But when you sit there and all of a sudden say, well, chuck someone out, it's a lot tougher. So I agree. And we don't want to get bogged down talking about the All-Australian team, because what we do want to talk about is the Brisbane Lions. Because, Lynchy, your old club is really in crisis at the moment. You're looking for a coach, you're looking to restructure the football department. You've got a host of players that apparently want out of the club. We don't know how factual that is or how many that is. You've got to attract people to the club. How difficult has it all been?
Well, I think that for the club, they're going through a difficult period. If you look back 6 weeks ago, I think the perception around the Brisbane Lions was really good and positive. I think they won 8 of their last 11 games. They were going on a bit of an upward curve, I would have thought, going into the next season. Obviously, the sacking of Michael Voss. Obviously the factional split on the board as well. Now the ability to actually find a coach is dragged on deep into September. So there's some priorities to sort out. Certainly before they have to worry about the players. I mean, that is a priority. But you've got to get the board sorted and you've got to get a coach appointed, because as soon as you can get a coach appointed, you can actually send your Brad Scott, the coach, around to these guys' houses and actually speak to them, get them re-engaged, if indeed they are all walking out.
I'd ask a question to you guys. Are they in a worse position than Port Adelaide were this time last year?
Absolutely not.
I mean, it's amazing how everyone's in crisis when... I mean, they'll turn it around really quickly, in my opinion. I think they've got a really talented list. No doubt they need to get some things sorted. But, people are talking about Port Adelaide being...
Basket case.
Oh, dire straits. It's all over for them. I mean, look, and they finish in the top 6 this year. So I think they'll turn it around pretty quickly.
It doesn't guarantee Brisbane bouncing back, though. I want you to tell us about the players that apparently or purportedly want out of this side?
Yep.
Because there is some talent amongst them and a lot of early draft picks.
Early draft picks, and that's the concern. To hear that young Jared Pollock wants to go back to South Australia, obviously that'd be disappointing. Billy Longer from 2 years ago, Sam Doherty, Patrick Karnisis and Elliot Yeo. Now, you always understand when guys aren't getting games, they're going to get a little bit disgruntled with where they're playing at the time. But, I mean, the thing is, Elliot Yeo, I think, came in a third of the way through the season, played some fantastic football. I think he's got a big future ahead of him. Doherty has done the same thing. And the other three guys have spent large bulks of their time at Brisbane in the local competition. I'd be really disappointed to see these guys go. But if clubs like yours got out of their ear, it might be a chance. But that's the thing. I mean, it is just media speculation. Now, obviously, if someone wants to go back home, that's going to be tough too. But that's where we've got to get the coach involved to actually get them re-engaged in the club and stay.
All right, well,
and find out the facts,
let's
really.
Flip it 12 months down the track and let's say we're preparing for the 2015 season. How's the team look on field?
If all these players go? Well, if all these players go, that'd be, again, you're losing your top 2 or 3 picks from the last 2 drafts, and you just can't really press on in the next 2 years without those players. Now, if we look at this, obviously there's going to be a lot of young players go out, and especially, as I said, Doherty and Elliot Yeo were down back and looked like they really cemented their position. Now, we've got... The back line looks all right. Golby's certainly settled in there. Merritt in your best team. If you're playing finals football, Daniel Merritt plays at full back. Joel Patfull, one of his second best and fairest. And we go through the midfield. Now, the depth of talent through the midfield, your second tier rotations is where the question mark is. And the question mark, regardless of the young guys that we're talking about that may potentially leave, is still here in your key posts. Young Paparone from WA, really good aerobic runner. He could hold down centre forward in a few years' time, though, but that's 3 or 4 years' time. And Jordan Lyle as well. They've got to find replacement key position guys. That's the big task.
Not enough class there. There's only 4 first-round selections on that list. You can't afford to lose the other 5 players that are all virtually first-round selections.
Well, that's the thing. That's where your class is. The last 2 years, class injection into the club, it's an absolute priority to make sure you keep those guys around. So, look, we hear all sorts of speculation. We will continue to over the next couple of weeks. But whether it's reality, I'm not sure.
You've been a busy man. Do you feel conflicted at all?
Oh.
Why is that?
Well, you're also helping your very good friend Paul Roos at Melbourne.
No, I'm not.
And you've already snipped your premiership teammate in Brad Scott, one of his staff at North Melbourne.
I have not. I've got nothing to do with it all.
That's
just
only where it begins at 1 too. I think there might be a couple
Nibbling
of
at
others.
a couple others.
Well, it's been unbelievable. I'm not sure who
amazing.
Lynch is working for. He's a mercenary. He's a gun for hire at the moment.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, beautiful. Mike Sheen puts me up as the list manager on the couch, and all of a sudden I'm running the show. But nothing to do with Roosie. If he kills your staff, that's up to Roosie. You should talk to him.
For all Brisbane fans out there, I think what's really important to know is that you're not going to lose Pollock, Longer, Doherty for nothing.
Yeah.
Like, that's a side there. The worst case scenario, you lose it for nothing.
Lynch will make sure he gets something for them.
No doubt he will. He's very, very good at what he does. That's why he's in high demand.
And the other thing to remember is that Alistair Lynch didn't tell us everything that's going on. Hey, we'll take a quick break, come back with our preliminary final and also our Brownlow prediction. Welcome back to AFL Insider, and we're looking forward to a big Brownlow night on Monday night. Could Gary Ablett do it? An amazing run he's had with the Players Association's MVP, but there's plenty of talent that'll challenge him. Players like Swan, Pendlebury, Fife, so many good chances. It's going to be a cracking night. I can say that we are operating 1 short here on Insider. I suspect we may have just got a little raw, a little close to the bone with Lynchy about a few things that are going on, so we'll push on and hopefully he'll rejoin us next week. And I know you've been waiting to have a go at him too because he's...
You know where he is, don't you?
He's brought it on himself.
All right, let's take a look at our preliminary final predictions and also for the Brownlow medal on Monday night. All right, not one of us has picked identical Brownlow medalists. That's interesting. So we've covered the field, probably the top 4 favourites there.
They'll get a lot of votes, won't they? I mean, it's a guess at this stage. How do you know what the umpires are
Scotty,
doing?
you had to be the party pooper, didn't you? Kingy, what sort of margin are you talking about?
60 points.
Well, you're obviously not that
points.
confident, Jace. 2 points.
Yeah, what are you worried about? No, really,
going back
4
to-
points.
Oh! You always have to be respectful of the opposition. Anyone go for a Sydney victory?
No.
Okay.
40 points. No.
So that's interesting, isn't it? It's a great final weekend to look forward to this weekend, and then the big one the following week.
Can't wait.
Scotty, we look forward to catch you again next week. You too, Scotty. Kingy. And fingers crossed, maybe Lynch will rejoin it. We'll see you next Tuesday night.
This has been a Fox Footy production for Fox Sports.